Welcome to the Amash Files, your one-stop podcast for Justin Amash's march to the presidency, featuring deep dives into who Justin Amash is, campaign analysis from experts, and news from the campaign trail. If you're ready, let's get started. So I'm here with Nathan Leamer. Nathan's our Justin Amash insider. He worked for Justin for quite a while. He started back in 2010 when Justin was still in the state house. He served from January through the end of his first term. He then went to D.C. and followed him and served in the office there from 2010 until 2013. Then Nathan went to Generation Opportunity, served there for about a year and a half, worked at Gen R Street in 2015, and then went to work as a policy advisor for Ajit Pai, who's the FCC chair, helped develop the net neutrality policies, and until just a few months ago, and now he's working at Target Victory, which is a public affairs firm in D.C. Nathan, thanks so much for joining us on this really pretty exciting week.
Hey, thanks for having me, Eric. It's good to be here.
Yeah, I mean, pretty exciting that we talked probably about 2-3 months ago about the possibility that Justin might announce his run for presidency. He's now announced it. And so what's your initial reaction since it's fairly new news?
I mean, that's pretty exciting information. I will have to look at the field and see what's going on, but it's kind of an interesting feeling thinking about the guy who I met in a Starbucks in January of 2010, who was just maybe 29 years old, is now running for president. That's a pretty cool feeling. It's pretty exciting to hear when you're close to someone who's doing something like that. It's pretty neat.
Yeah, and I wanted to bring you on because the goal of the Amash Files is to have obviously people understand who Justin Amash is, and there's no better way of finding out who he is than to find someone who worked for him. And you worked for him for about 4 years. Can you tell us a little bit about what it's like working with him in Lansing, and then obviously it's a bigger staff and probably different sort of feel when you get to D.C. Just explain sort of how the office runs and how he runs things and what he's like to work as a boss.
There's no one like Justin Amash. He's quite a unique person, a good person, someone who is genuine, and someone who really is careful in the way he thinks about legislation or public policy issues, or even the way he engages the public through social media or speeches or traditional press. There's so many different stories to tell and different things to share. But the one thing that's been fascinating is he hasn't changed. That's like being the constant, no matter who is in his office or who's not. Justin Amash is the same. He's a constant, both his principles, both his commitments to constitutional values, and his political ideology, and philosophical worldview. But he stays the same, and I think that's the unique thing that you can say about him that I can't always say about politicians, especially in this town.
Yeah, I'm sure not. You've definitely run into your share of them in D.C. That's actually one of the things that people always describe with Ron Paul. Ron Paul served in Congress a couple times. I know he was there, left, and then came back. And he also ran for president as a Libertarian in 1988. But one thing that you'll talk to people about him, and that he really never changed as far as who he was fundamentally. Maybe his strategy changed, maybe the people he was around changed, but what he cared about, what he worked towards, and was consistent. And you can watch the old speeches from Ron Paul back in 1980, and they're not really any different than when he was running for president in 2007. It's just that he had people cheering him on in big crowds later. How is that so unique in D.C.? I mean, I guess Justin hasn't been around that long. He's been around for about almost 10 years now, I guess, serving. So give us an example of like other offices and how, yours was different than maybe the regular sort of a typical congressional office.
That's funny. So again, post working for Justin, I've worked with a number of different congressmen and senators, both on both sides of the aisle, working, advocating for particular policy issues, or just working in coalitions and other things that you do in the swamp that is DC. And something that's unique about him, and it comes through immediately, is the fact that he spends most of his time in the office with his staff. He will sit in the bullpen where there's all of the staffers working together, the chief of staff, deputy chief of staff, legislative aides, and press secretary, et cetera. And he's like holding court, and he's doing impressions of of people, and he's regaling us in these stories about, floor negotiations, or how he was thinking about this or that, or commenting on which pundits on TV, and his interaction with them, or what he thinks they're probably like. And what was so fascinating was he was genuinely interested in what each staffer had to say. It wasn't just for us to listen to him talk. It was for him to engage us in ideas, to get to help us grow in our thinking and our understanding of the policies and principles that were being discussed. And I just think that was just such a unique thing, and you don't see that very often. A lot of members of Congress stay off in their office. His office is cool. I mean, it looks like a Hayek fanboy office, but like it's got like Friedrich Hayek and like Bastiat pictures and Friedman pictures. It's like it looks like a Cato dorm room. But like he didn't spend much time in there. He came in and hung out with us, and that was always a really unique thing that I thought was such a cool opportunity for me to disagree or debate and discuss. And he didn't mind that you disagreed. He just wanted to get us to think more clearer and to teach us how to be more thoughtful in the way we engage. And I thought that was that expressed itself through all the ways we worked.
It's strange. It sounds like he's more like a teacher than a boss. I mean,
I think that's actually a fair point. I mean, he's kind of like a big brother / a mentor / the teacher / he also happens to have a voting card in the U.S. Congress.
How was the responsibility for staffers? So I imagine you interact with other congressional staffs. Was there a significant difference when you would interact with each other as far as your focus and what you're doing, and you're interacting with constituents, or viewing legislation?
It's funny. A lot of people think being a libertarian-leaning member of Congress means that you want to like destroy this state immediately, and therefore maybe his staff would not care about constituent concerns or things of that nature. And that couldn't be farther from the truth. One of the things that was always came across was the commitment of his team to helping the constituents around them, even if representative wanted to destroy each of these different departments. He was willing to work with those departments to get help for his constituents, whether it was immigration or IRS issues or social security issues. And his team always worked really hard and was committed to that. And then also on the legislation, whenever the policy analysis and the white papers and the vote recommendations that my colleagues put and myself got to put together were cut above the rest. I mean, they were better than anything either the Republican or Democratic caucus would ever come out with. It was, more in-depth and detailed than like the Republican Study Committee's analysis. And like, I think I remember a few times him coming back, sharing the documents, these vote recommendations that were super long, and they were intended just for him, and sharing that like other members were reading them, and other people were like getting something out of these vote recommendations. And I was, assumed that worst case scenario, if he ever left Congress, he would have no trouble starting a very effective libertarian leaning think tank or advocacy group that could write vote recommendations for people.
So that was different than for your office. I mean, you guys. So do you think you guys were focused more on legislation and what the votes were on than other offices? Did they just rely on the party, I guess, the study committees?
Yeah, I think that's a fair thought. I think the first and foremost, and that's a big part of the proper role of a policymaker, and Justin embodies this more than anyone else, is you're looking for unintended consequences. You're looking for that what is seen versus that what is unseen. We want to focus on, the jobs, right? Or, the, people who are uninsured. But then what I think Justin did so effectively and has done so effectively is thinking about, well, if we fix it here or a perceived fix, what other problems might occur over here that we're not seeing? In fact, we saw that this week, I think, when Justin wrote this fantastic tweet thread explaining what was and what was not problematic with Governor Whitmer's orders. What could be a problem here? What could be a long-term effect that people might not be thinking about now, but 6 months from now, 3 months from now, whatever it is, people will definitely pick up on it. He's usually like ahead of the curve in that way. And I think that how many times did members of Congress say, oh, we didn't read it, or we didn't know that was going to happen. And then it ends
Right.
up that like it happened. Well, Justin knew. Justin and his staff definitely knew that this would happen.
Uh, what do you think? What do you think it was like working with Ron Paul's staff? Because at that point, when Justin was his first term, I think that was Ron Paul's last term before he retired. What was it like working with Ron Paul's staff? Was it similar? Did you guys collaborate a lot, or what was the relationship there?
I don't know how much we worked with them regularly. I think in the very beginning, there may have been some collaboration, but I think and I'll be honest, and nothing against our dear friends in Dr. Paul's office, there was also a difference in the way that we approach things. I think, within the libertarian world, there's like kind of different branches. And I think that, Justin's more classical liberal. In some ways, Ron Paul's perspective on tax policy is significantly different than Justin's. And I think things like that show that there's a bit of a difference there. And so, yeah, I think that's probably the best way of describing it.
Right. I think, when I look at, if you were to find some major difference between the two, I think Ron Paul would be in support of any sort of tax reduction, whether it's targeted towards certain corporations or businesses or, groups of people.
Yeah.
In the sort of the belief that, well, any sort of reduction of tax burden is good. Whereas Justin and there are a number of libertarians in that line would say that you have to have broad-based policies because if you target it, it's going to cause distortions in the market. I mean, I think you can make an argument for either one, and I think they're both valid. I tend to side probably more with Justin's, but I can certainly see the argument on either side.
I also think it's fair to say, a lot of Ron's team had been there for many years, and so there was definitely a generational gap too.
Sure.
Whereas, I think that's also plays into it where Justin's team was generally younger. Justin was congressman when he was 30, right? So like
Right.
that's in the team here he put around him were peers. Maybe I was on the younger side and I was 24, I think. But like, if you think like, I don't think anyone was either maybe a year or two older than him, but like in terms of his policy team, it was very, very much like peers. And I think that that's a difference generationally between him and maybe some of the older members. Nothing against those members, but his team had new ideas. There were people coming up with like, balanced budget amendments and, rethinking the surveillance state and trying to come up with unique amendments that you can introduce instead of, maybe Ron, who would maybe just say, "Oh, let's just end the surveillance state altogether." Justin would have more of, I think, a nuanced approach to how to get to it. And by the way, I hope you don't mind my Ron Paul impression.
No, it was terrible, but that's okay.
And the Fed. Justin does a far better impression, I'll be honest.
So, well, let's go to that real quick. What kind of impressions does he do? I mean, so obviously he did Ron Paul. I know he does Mitt Romney. What other ones does he do well?
His John Boehner is second to none. I'll be like 100% honest. He gets John Boehner right on in a way that I don't think anyone has done. I've never seen him do Sleepy Joe. I haven't seen him do the president's impression, but John Boehner always stuck out to me. I always thought that was a pretty funny one. And he used to comment because John Boehner, Speaker Boehner, would routinely smoke cigarettes throughout Capitol Hill. He's like the only guy who could smoke in the Capitol. Right. And Justin would come back and tell you about like the smell in the elevator afterwards, and he would like describe it and like find out how John Boehner acted in his mannerisms, and it was just funny. It was lighthearted, and I think that was neat how he balanced that lighthearted, conversation with serious work. And I mean, how many times did I submit things to him that had grammatical errors or small errors, and other people might just let them exist. He didn't want that to happen. He wanted to be right. And he said, "Hey, look, I'm putting my name behind this. I want to make sure it's done to the best of its ability." And I think that that's something that a lot of people don't always do. One of the best examples of that is AOC famously released a draft of the Green New Deal. It had all these errors and flaws in it. You never saw Justin do something like that. He always made sure that when he's going to announce something, he has it, thought through. You could disagree with it, but he's going to have it thought through, and it's going to be done right in his mind. And I think that's a noble skill.
Yeah, I'm trying to think back now. I don't know if Justin is technically a millennial. I don't know where the cutoff is, or if he's like the tail end of Gen X. I'm not sure. But it sounds like you guys were, I mean, when he came in, he was 29, 30 years old, right? So he was, I think he was the second youngest. I think he was youngest, and Aaron Schock was there for briefly, and I don't know if he was younger.
Yeah, he was the second youngest member. Aaron Schock was there beforehand. Justin's outlasted Aaron.
Yeah. We won't go into Aaron's fall from grace, but
yes. Still has a fantastic Instagram account, though. I gotta say, anyone who wants to watch a good life, Aaron Schock's Instagram is incredible.
I'm always surprised because usually when you see people who are public officials with a Twitter account, and this goes to the president too. I mean, I think it's being handled by staffers or by other people. So there's almost like a level of, if something goes wrong, you can sort of have a level of deniability that, well, I didn't, my staffer did that or something, or
sure.
Posted something. But I don't think that's the case for Justin, and I don't think it's the case for the president either. But how is that different? I mean, how do you think that makes it different than the other congressmen and senators?
No, yeah, I mean, Justin, wants the control over his brand and his image and what he's said. And to be honest, no one can quite capture his voice as accurately as he can. He knows that. And so while there are good staff on him that have, I think, learned how to mimic his voice or mimic his style, he still has edits for them. And so I think it allows him just to cut to the chase and in a very true libertarian fashion, just cut up the middleman, let him do it. And I think that just speaks to his approach. And I just think that is unique about him. And, it also speaks to his age. I mean, yeah, right. Gen X or millennial, he's in that space where has some tendencies of Gen X and some tendencies of millennials. But he was an early adopter of Facebook to post all his votes and explain what he was and wasn't doing. He did that in the State House. No one else had done that before. And then also he continued that. And then I don't know if he still does it, but I don't use his Facebook account as much as I used to. But on Twitter, he's really metamorphosized into this entity on Twitter that you're going to get straight news. You're going to get straight evaluation of an issue. You may disagree with it or agree with it, but you're going to get his perspective. And what is so different from other politicians who will go nameless, he's discerning in the way he converses with people. You don't see ad hominem attacks. You don't see name calling. You don't see things that you traditionally associate with politicians. And you see this as you said, kind of like a teacher explaining what's going on. I think one of the things I was so fascinated by his Declaration of Independence was he said that there needs to be someone to educate those about the political process and the congressional process and the constitutional system, and how we've just lost that. There are good think tanks out there and good advocates and, National Constitution Day events, but there's no one actually on Capitol Hill, spending the time explaining, okay, what is a constitutional or a limited constitutional approach to this, or strict constitutional approach to this, or, how do you fairly evaluate this one way or the other, and debate and discuss in a way that promotes free thinking. And I think that's something that he's done better than anyone else.
So his next challenge here, now that he's just announced, I guess it's technically an exploratory committee. I can't remember the reason people do that, have those designations, but
I don't know.
Yeah,
it's still crazy to me, by the way. There's something awesome about, again, I worked for this guy. It's cool to see him, taking on this challenge, this Herculean challenge. And the odds are obviously, not in his favor necessarily, but he's going to do it. Why? Because he thinks what he's doing is right, and he's going to show that, and he's going to demonstrate his skills. I think that's a pretty awesome thing. I'm sure my dad and my mom are pretty thrilled to see that. Wow, this guy who my son worked for, he's running for president. How crazy! So that'll be a neat family conversation, I'm sure.
Yeah, it's gonna be it's an interesting conversation in my family as well. So for the same
reasons.
You've
known him for years. I think you've known him longer than I have. That isn't it's insane. It's a really cool thing.
Yeah, no, I've known him since before. I mean, it's you go back to I remember just hanging out doing whatever, and then suddenly this guy's running for president of the United States, and it's kind of hard to even sort of comprehend in many ways because you just know this just like some guy. I mean, he's not just some guy, but just like your friend, and you're suddenly they're doing something pretty remarkable, and I don't know, it's hard to sort of to really grasp what's going on. And I'm sure it's even more so for him, except he's, put so much, as you and I know, he just does so much planning and thought into all this stuff.
And he also has, and sorry if I can jump in, he also has this incredible family network. His parents and his mom and dad are incredible people, and his wife, Kara, is like one of my favorite people I've met. My wife and I just adore her so much, and she's been such a good friend to us over watching us grow up as well. Literally watching me grow up since graduated college essentially. But also his brothers, Jeff and John are his rock. I mean, they've been there every step of the way and helping him think through this stuff. And it's kind of an almost like old world family mentality in some ways that like I'm not used to. Like I'm not as close with my brothers as he is, but it's just a really neat network that I think is genuine. It's a real genuine thing, and there's a real pride that they share, but also a tenderness and compassion. And it is remarkable. It really is.
Yeah, and I don't know if it's somewhat of a reflection of the fact that they're recent immigrants, that he and his brothers are sort of first generation, and maybe in some ways you have to be really tight as a family because your family is really all you have when you come to a new country, and I mean they have some extended relatives, and maybe it's just different for them. And I don't know, as like I'm sort of third generation, so for me it's a couple generation removed, so it's just more Americanized or whatever.
It's funny. Everyone talks about Gerald Ford as like the preeminent politician from the 3rd congressional district in the Grand Rapids area, and I don't discount that. I wasn't really alive whenever he was a congressman, but I'm not that old. But like in some weird ways, Justin reflects that in the same way. I mean, he follows that tradition of really thoughtful members of Congress like Paul Henry or even Bernie Ehlers, the Calvin grad, way to go Calvin professors, who are really thoughtful. And even though their ideology might be different, the way that they're focused on the family, the ties of the community, it embodies a lot of the things I think people from West Michigan hold close and hold dear. Closely, very religious, very thoughtful, willing to engage people who disagree with them. Want to have good discussions and good debates, like any a lot of good Dutch Reformed people do in Grand Rapids. And I think that's like a unique thing. And I think some people overlook that. And I think that's what's been neat about Justin the past few years is having a Twitter account, having a social media account, having his position in Congress, where he's able to tell that story. And it just looks so different than the rest of the political conversation that's going on across the country.
With the Libertarian convention coming up here in probably, 6-7 weeks, I'm not sure, whenever the end of May, we think it's going to be then. It's hard to know with the coronavirus.
Yeah,
and how things
what
have
is
changed.
happening with that? Is it
hard?
It's
hard. It's unknown. I mean, I think at this point, it's going to be in Austin, Texas, basically the weekend before Memorial Day, or that weekend. And the plan is still that it's going to happen there, but there's, with all the lockdown orders and large gathering orders, it's hard to know. The governor in Texas says he's going to start reopening the state. What that means by the end of May and what the Austin mayor thinks is they're going to do, I think there's a lot unknown, and so it's hard to know what's going to happen with this convention. Whether it's delayed to maybe after Freedom Fest, that's been one sort of possibility. We'll just see. But obviously Justin's jumping into that race late. There are people who've been running since last year or even longer.
Sure.
What would you say if someone's a skeptic in the Libertarian Party, they're like, we've keep endorsing these, we've nominated former Republicans the last 3 election cycles, and we're kind of tired of these guys coming and then they just go. What would your pitch to be to someone like that and say, how is this unique? How is this different? What do you think you could say that would convince someone that, this is an opportunity you don't want to pass on?
Yeah, I mean, I call myself a libertarian, but I'll be honest, I am not very familiar or closely aligned with the Libertarian Party infrastructure. And I, like most people, recognize the striptease dancer from a few years ago, or Gary Johnson's, Aleppo moment, and which seems so passé, by the way, years later. So I mean, to be honest, I don't know much more than that, but I will say this: if you want to be taken seriously, sometimes you have to elect the most, have the most serious person in the room. And I think that there is a difference in the way that Justin carries himself than a lot of the characters that have been in the Libertarian Party. He's not one who's going to do a striptease. He's not one who's going to have an Aleppo moment. And I think those are things that would garner a level of seriousness that, Vermin Supreme or whoever else might be in the third party space these days wouldn't. And so I am really intrigued to see how the party infrastructure responds to him. Libertarian Party world is very different than libertarian think tank land in DC.
Yeah.
So,
right.
what I would be a fish out of water at that convention. And I'll be honest about that. But there's a lot of good people there. And I think that unfortunately a lot of those people are stereotyped within the, these meme moments. And I think that undermines some of their message. And I think that, there's some really serious people and thoughtful people who have been a part of that infrastructure. And I think that this is what they've been waiting for, to have someone who can be taken seriously in a way and take their message to a much broader audience. And who better to do that than, a Palestinian American who has been in Congress and is only 40 years old. I mean, how awesome of an opportunity to have that. Not a has-been, not someone who's, was relevant in the late 90s in Massachusetts, not someone who, is in and out of jail because he's bringing guns onto the National Mall. I don't cook cash. But like someone who's actually serious. And I think that's irrelevant today. I think it's an incredible opportunity, and any party infrastructure, we should take that seriously. And I would say this, if I would have said the same thing if Mark Cuban had jumped into, right? Like someone like that who is relevant in the conversation, has money, has a name, speaks well, things like that would have been thoughtful for that they should think seriously about. But I think Justin is exactly the type of person that would be a right fit for those libertarians over there.
Yeah,
My friend, my cousins in the libertarian world.
I mean, my feeling is obviously, I'm obviously supportive, but I feel like the one thing that he brings that others don't at this point is that they haven't in the past is that he is truly libertarian. And I think, most of the GOP people who defected and went to run in as libertarians, they had libertarian tendencies. They had libertarian instincts. Maybe they leaned libertarian on some issues. But I hear someone who I think, obviously if you're a libertarian, you have all sorts of different views of what actually it means to be a libertarian and, whether someone's a purist or not. But it feels like he's someone who can articulate the non-aggression principle. He can articulate Austrian economics, and he believes in them, and he's supported them through legislation and, fighting FISA and all these things. So I would think that he sort of checks all the boxes outside the fact that he hasn't been part of the party for a long time. And so that's the one thing that people have to decide what they, how important it is if someone's been, toiling for a long time. It's kind of like, and as far as people treating the Libertarian Party seriously, it does very much feel like, in his analogy, but I feel like they're like the Washington Generals, if you're familiar with the Harlem Globetrotters, right? The team that always comes in, they're sort of they always lose. But at some point they're, if they were to suddenly win, then you'd look at them differently. And it's just because it hasn't happened. But doesn't mean it can't. And so I think that's the great unknown when it goes forward. One last question. When it comes to Justin's office, sort of get back to that discussion. What is the loyalty level of people? And I think we talked about this before, where you'd have get-togethers and stuff with the office. What are other people's opinion of the office, not just yours? If you could speak to that.
It's a great question. All of us, we've all become more independent. Even those who've left the office. Me in my case, almost 7 years ago, 6.5 years ago. And so, our views have changed on certain things. I'll be honest, I haven't always agreed with every single vote, or I haven't necessarily agreed with every strategy that has been taken. I definitely have my thoughts. But one of the things that has always continued is an open dialogue and an actual conversation in a real, genuine care about Justin and his brand, and wanting to see him succeed, and feeling that loyalty to him. And everyone who's ever worked for him has felt that way. I've never talked to someone who wasn't proud to be part of Team Amash and proud to see where he's gone from there. We've always joked about the Amash Alumni Association and how we'll make T-shirts someday, and I keep on forgetting to actually make a T-shirt. But there's something really we all kind of share as that you can't take away from us. And that's what's kind of funny. Sometimes you'll see, in the news or on Twitter, you'll see someone who's like, we worked for Justin and we can't stand him. And I'm like, okay, you did a walk day and you were, you did a walk day once in 2010, and that's not the same as working for him. And to you who spoke at the town hall, I think you overstated your relationship, if you remember what I'm talking about, Eric.
Yeah.
But among his staff, that's never been the case. Every one of us is just, our love for him, our admiration for him has grown. And I think it'll be interesting to see what happens to all those staffers as they've gone on. And what's neat is we've all kind of had different levels of success and growth since working for him. And he really served, I think, in a good way to set us on the right path forward. Some of the most thoughtful, engaged, productive people I know in DC are former Amash staffers. I think it's a testament to him.
Yeah, could be the hiring process, right? The selection process. Well, thanks so much for being on the show. I hope people have a better feel for Justin. Nathan Leamer, former staff member for Justin Amash, now working at Target Victory. I hope to have you on again in future, probably discuss a little bit more what's going on, maybe what's going on in DC. Thanks again.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, Eric. This is exciting. Good luck with your Amash files. I love it. Let's see where it goes from here, and I'll definitely listen.
All right. Thanks a lot. Bye. Thanks for listening to the Amash Files. Please subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast player and share it with your friends. We'd appreciate it if you left a written and 5-star review too. Send all questions and guest ideas to amashfiles@gmail.com.